Hello there, and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week, meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and I know there's going to be a lot of interest in today's guest.
Yes. Today we're really happy to have Ryan Sharp on. He is the relatively new sports editor for the Oklahoman and newsok.com. He is a native Oklahoman, and we're going to meet him in a few minutes and talk about what's going on in the sports department and in sports generally in Oklahoma.
A very impactful position in the world of sports in the state of Oklahoma. Ryan Sharp, today's guest on The Verdict, and we'll be right back.
I've known I was going to be an artist since I was a little kid. I still have teachers that in grade school that still have my artwork. I think I told them something along the lines, this is keep that, it's going to be worth money someday. I'm Justin Mader, I'm an artist, and I'm Chickasaw. My muse is the Muskogean, Mississippian art. When I see that, my mind just fills up with bubbles of ideas. My big thing right now is shell carving, the shell gorgets. My work is refined more and more until I found my own rhythm. I also do metallurgy, where I've been acid etching copper and hammering copper to make a copper repoussé. You only have one chance to do it right, so it requires a lot of planning and thought and just patience. My Chickasaw heritage is the foundation of who I am. It's the roots of where I come from, and it inspires me as an artist and inspires the tenacity of never giving up.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofanation.com.
Hello there, and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
As we said in the opening segment, Ryan Sharp, the sports editor of the Oklahoman, is our guest today. And he's going to be talking to us about what's going on in the sports department at the Oklahoman and newsok.com. He's a native Oklahoman, did his undergraduate work in sports journalism at Oklahoma State University. Since that time, he has been living in Bethel Acres and has been with the Oklahoman now, I guess, 16 years?
About 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
I added 4 years to it. Sorry about that. And this year, he was named sports editor at the Oklahoman, and we wanted to get him on and talk about what's going on at the Oklahoman in sports and talk about sports in general. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is a blast.
Great to have you on, Ryan. Give us a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you first develop those first interests in the wide world of sports?
I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma, just a little outside of McAllister. I've played sports my entire life, of course, Little League baseball and football. Growing up, moved to central Oklahoma about in junior high. Did the same thing, played baseball, football, played golf in high school. Graduated, went to Oklahoma State. Kind of fiddled around with a bunch of different majors, trying to decide what I wanted to do. My dad was an engineer, so he tried to talk me into doing that for a little bit. I took about a class and a half and decided that was absolutely not for me. And so somebody asked me, what do you enjoy? And so talking about sports, writing about sports, reading it. So it was kind of natural. Had some great professors at Oklahoma State that kind of steered me in the right direction. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I ended up with an internship in Indianapolis, working at the Star. Was there over a summer when they had the Indy 500, the Brickyard race, a very passionate auto racing community, of course the Colts and the Pacers. And that just kind of kicked it off. Came back home in 2014, got married that summer, and started work at the Oklahoman the next month.
Who are your who are the people in the world of sports, journalists or non-journalists, you think who inspired you to take on this career?
You know, I grew up a child of the 80s and the early 90s, so I mean, there was such big-time athletes. I mean, it sounds cliched, but Michael Jordan. I mean, I was a huge Cowboys fan. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin. I lived and breathed and died by those guys and what they did. And so those guys and other athletes at that time, I mean, such polarizing sports figures that Dennis Rodman, I mean, people that we watched every day growing up. And then, of course, I mean, my parents, my dad was at every game that I played. He was at, I mean, I was in a music major when I first went to Oklahoma State. They were at every concert that I had. So my dad was he was always my coach, was a big key part of that as well.
I noticed from bio, I didn't mention it in the opening, but you live out in Bethel Acres, and you're on the Board of Trustees.
I am.
The town of Bethel Acres. How did you select Bethel Acres? I'm familiar with it. I know where it is, about its size. How did you select Bethel Acres?
It goes back to my parents. My mom was a school teacher for 35 odd years. When we moved to Shawnee in '94, she took over as a long-term substitute for a teacher that was on maternity leave. And so we transferred into the Bethel School District from Shawnee. So I ended up graduating from Bethel, graduating high school. So after my wife and I got married, we wanted to have a little bit of room to move around. Didn't want to live so close to the office. So we kind of started going out in different directions from the city. Ended up in Bethel. Bought a little bit of acreage and live out there.
One of the many things that the Oklahoman does a good job of covering is high school sports. In fact, if it wasn't for the Oklahoman's coverage, I don't know where people would go for information on high school sports. Is that something that's special to you because coming from a medium-sized town?
It is. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Bethel's awful small. We have one stop sign and one gas station. That's about it. It's important. Nowhere else in sports can you get so many kids' names in a publication where it means so much to them. And so a couple things. One, you better get it right because you're going to hear from mama and grandma and everybody else. But it's important to them. It's things that are clipped out and saved in family Bibles and family scrapbooks for years and years and years. That is not lost on us. We have two very, very talented writers that cover high schools full time. And then you add Barry Trammell and Jenny Carlson to the mix that write about high schools from time to time, and you've got a pretty special group of folks that cover something that is really important to people in this state.
Well, and I don't know if people realize how difficult it is to cover high school sports because although the coaches may have some universality and some sort of name recognition, basically every roster turns over every year, and there's 1,000 different communities playing some level of sports, and develop any level of expertise or anything that could be called thorough is really, really difficult. So I want to thank you all for that. But the other end of the spectrum, you guys give the Thunder a lot of coverage. So I mean, talk about different ends of the spectrum there. You're covering the most highly skilled athletes in the world on one hand, and then you're covering boys or girls who are just giving it their best and may not have a whole lot of athletic talent to give.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of pairing of things that we cover because you have, like you said, things from high school athletics where we cover high school golf, which doesn't obviously get a lot of attention nationally or even locally. Then you go to covering something like the Thunder where it's very high visibility. People are super invested in it. For years around here, it was always OU football, OSU football in high schools that kind of ran our thinking. And now it's Thunder. OU football, OSU football, high schools that kind of dictate how we determine what we cover. When the Hornets came for the 2 years, it was very, very important to us to put our foot right in the middle of it and say this is important. This is nothing like this has ever been here before. We need to make sure that people understand what they're seeing. We went out and hired a very, very talented writer that covered the Hornets for the 2 years, Darnell Mayberry. He covered the Hornets for the 2 years. The year that they were gone, he actually covered some OSU football for us. That was right about the time we were getting into a lot of video work and website work. So he actually held a camera. Mike Gundy's famous rant, Darnell was the one holding the camera in the back of the room. And then, of course, when the Thunder came, Darnell covered them for 7 years and just stepped off the beat this past year to do some website work for us, and he's now our senior assistant sports editor. And so having people that have covered the Thunder and know its value to this community has been very, very important to us.
Let's talk about a couple of things. You two guys are sports journalists, and I'm not, but so these are the kind of questions that occur to me. What size staff do you have that writes primarily in sports?
It's a little fluid, but we typically have about 12 full-time writers. We put 2 beat writers on every beat that we have. So you've got 2 columnists, Barry Trammell and Jenny Carlson, 2 OU writers, Ryan Aber, and we actually just hired a new OU writer. Her name is Brooke Pryor, she's from North Carolina. 2 Oklahoma State writers, John Helsing, Kyle Fredrickson. 2 high school writers, Scott Wright and Jacob Unruh. And then we have an outdoors writer, Ed Godfrey, who covers some high schools and a couple other things. And we actually just hired another writer that is going to be a full-time writer within the next month or so for us, that is going to cover soccer in high schools. The energy is a big deal. And I think given the news from this weekend and everything else, it could only get bigger over the next few years. And it's important to people in this community. So we felt it important to find somebody that's got some soccer background to come in and cover that team. So James is going to do some good work for us as well.
Where do the stories come from? How many of them are driven by the reporter's own ideas? How many of them are driven by you? How many of them actually come from some email you get from somebody out in the field?
The majority of them come from the writers. I mean, those are the guys that are out in the field every day. They're the ones that go to the games. They're the ones that talk to fans. They get emails from numerous fans. But the majority of them come from their minds. My goal and my role is to kind of take those and mold them into the best possible form, and how we can present them to different audiences, because what might go in the paper might look completely different than what's online. So it's my responsibility to take those ideas and kind of mold them into what best suits our readers, depending on where they consume it.
Well, we just have about 30 seconds left. In 30 seconds, in major categories, summarize your duties as sports editor.
I'm a fireman. There are so many day-to-day functions that come up that you wouldn't assume a sports editor would do. Dealing with advertisers, which is obviously very, very important. Production schedules. We're going through some shifts in our production schedule. So when the paper has to be sent to the printer, things like that. Editing stories, planning coverage, hiring writers. I've been in this position for about a month, and I've spent about 90% of that time interviewing and hiring employees. So it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
I'm hoping now that we're getting closer to the season and that there's more editing to it and more idea generation.
Ryan Sharp is our guest. He's a sports editor at the Oklahoman. We'll have more on the verdict right after this.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Our guest is Ryan Sharp. He's the sports editor at the Oklahoman. One thing that has occurred in your professional lifetime is the advent of social media and how its impact on information. My question to you is, there's so much misinformation involved in social media. How do you filter through all that to determine what's worthwhile and how you pass along the facts as you know them to your readers?
It's tricky. And you've got to have kind of an eye open all the time for what's real and what's not. The way that we kind of monitor that, we have some folks on staff. We have a web editor that monitors social media pretty much their entire time they're working. And so their job is to find things that are relevant to our readers, wade through, figure out where the information's coming from, how important it is to our readers. Is it something that we can do and take care of in the office, which is just a quick rewrite to present to people and then link to the original source? Is it something that we need to follow up on with our writers and do our own? A lot of news judgment involved in determining the source of the information is the first deal. We get so many messages from Joe Smith in Tulsa that we may not know, but we also are monitoring other media outlets across the world for information. That has really become interesting with the Thunder. There are so many people that cover the Thunder in some degree. These guys go home wherever they may live, if they live outside of the city during the off season. So there's all kinds of media outlets wherever they may live that are reporting things on them. It's become really interesting with Ennis Canner and Stephen Adams. Because you've got some government-run media with Ennis Canner that is in play in that. And so there's always things to wade through and figure out what's right, what's not right, what is opinion, what is not opinion. Then with Stephen Adams, that guy just has a good time wherever he goes. And so we get calls from New Zealand media all the time asking for contact information because he's down there doing some kind of charity work. Just came up last week. He helped open a basketball court for a Boys and Girls Club down there and showed up with 3 or 4 of his teammates that nobody knew that was coming with him. But that kind of stuff, it's fun for us. It adds content for us that we may not have had otherwise. And that's really been the idea that I like with social media, is that we learn so much more now than we have, and so we're able to present that to our readers in a way that we've never been able to do in the past.
You graduated in sports journalism. I don't know how far the digital age had progressed by the time you graduated, but I would think there'd be different skill sets for writing a newspaper that's printed every day, and on the one hand, and then writing stuff for the internet or newsok.com. Are those two different skill sets?
Not necessarily different skill sets, but a different mindset when you're going through it. We had started down the road, the digital road, by the time I started working full time. But it's more, with the printed product, you're limited in space.
Yeah.
There's only so much paper in that thing every day. Whereas on the web, you can write to your heart's content, and we've got some writers that do that. And so it's a little bit of a challenge for the paper to cut it down. And for so many years when I started, every conversation we had about content and what we covered was dictated by what was going to go in the paper. Whereas now we have to think about the website. We have so many niche products that we produce, whether it's video, photo, the actual printed product, special sections that we produce. We just finished up some football preview sections. It's a different conversation now than it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, the Oklahoman has become a leader in kind of the digital technology revolution. You know, journalism entities everywhere were trying to figure out how they were going to be able to monetize the digital products, and the Oklahoman actually has some proprietary technology that other journalism entities have been using. So you guys have been way ahead on that side. But where are we headed? There's just this, we're raising a generation of young people now that expect it to be free. And as a guy who makes his living providing information in these areas, that's got to be somewhat concerning.
It is, and trust me, we have a lot of meetings to talk about that very thing. It's a tricky deal. For so long, we've had people that subscribe to our newspaper and still do, that value the information that they're getting. And it's a different group of folks than what consume our content online, who expect to get it free, like you said. And so trying to find the balance of what do we charge for, how do we charge for it, how does the ad rate work, how does advertising work for digital products versus what goes in the paper. That changes week to week, day to day, how we address that. Concerning, yes, also exciting to think that that we could be part of the group that figures it out is incredibly exciting to me. And that's how I challenge our folks every time we talk about it. Let's figure out how we're going to make this thing work well beyond 20, 30 years from now.
I'm always amazed at how many different ways, and I'm not picking on him, he's a longtime guest of this show frequently, and a good friend, Barry Trammell. How many different ways I can see Barry Trammell through the auspices of the Oklahoman. I can read about him in the newspaper. I can see on his newsok.com material that he writes. He's got a blog, which I presume is separate and apart from, it's part of the Oklahoman, but it's separate and apart from the other things. And then from time to time, particularly during sports seasons, you'll see him on television. Your own internal productions. That's got to make a sports editor tear his hair.
Well, the opposite.
It's all good.
It's
by
good.
the way.
I challenge folks around the country. I've gotten the chance to talk to numerous people around the country that work with columnists and other writers. You're not going to find a guy that works harder than Barry Trammell, or that works smarter than Barry Trammell. He is the most productive journalist I've ever seen in my life, and he's also a genuinely good human being. It's such a rare combination. But you're right. He writes for the paper every other day, if not more than that. During season, of course, he's writing every Saturday, every Sunday. He blogs 3 times a day. And when you think blogs get kind of a bad rap, that it's 2 or 3 sentences and it's just somebody's opinion, Barry's blogs are like his columns. They're very well thought out. They're lengthy. It's not something that's just off the top of his head. He has live chats that we do every day, we do one every day. He does one once a week. He's very, very present on our videos. He hosts our videos. He's obviously big on our commentary videos and analysis. Super, super productive, but just a genuinely nice human being. So he's the total package. I don't know what we do without him. We kind of sometimes take him for granted, but it shouldn't be.
It'd take 3 people to replace him.
Absolutely.
If it could be replaced.
Yeah, I'm not certain that he could. With his institutional knowledge of this state, and OU football, OSU football, the Thunder now, it would be awful hard to replace that.
Well, let's get some opinions now. One of the subjects that Barry writes on frequently is conference alignment and what's going to happen with the Big 12. And what's your take? What's your prediction, or how do you view the landscape and in the construction of the Big 12 right now?
It's awful hard to see the Big 12 being around in 4 or 5 years. I know there's a lot of posturing about adding 2 or 4 teams. I'm with Barry in that I question whether or not that's just about the TV money. It sure feels like you try to add 4 teams to try to get the bigger TV money, but I don't think anybody in the conference wants that. I think that they're either happy with 10 or 12 at most. So I have a hard time seeing the league, especially in its current state, being that way within 3 or 4 years.
A chance they would join one of the existing leagues and form some like 25-team league?
I think you'll see some fracturing. Some of these, the bigger conferences, SEC, Big Ten, are just so strong and have such strong TV contracts that you're going to have folks looking for a way to join those conferences. And so, when this happened 4 or 5 years ago, when it started, you kept hearing about these super conferences. I think that's a very real possibility within the next 10 years. About
30 seconds left. Give me an over-under on games, the number of games the Thunder will win in the regular season.
I've said 45. That's what they won 2 years ago and missed the playoffs. They won similar and were a high seed this past year. Given everything that's gone on in the roster construction, I think 45 is a reasonable number.
You understand when you're the mayor, you have to take the over. Just 'cause you have to be the optimistic guy in the community.
Sense.
I understand. Ryan Sharp, the editor at the sports department in the Oklahoman. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
There are now 11 million of us who live here and work here. I was 15 when I came here 6 years ago. I raised my family here. I drive my truck to my job every day. The only difference between now And 6 years ago, I do it legally. I wanted to. Because this is my home.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Ryan Sharp was our guest today.
Well, really good to have Ryan on. I had not met him before, and he's assuming a pretty big task. Sports are very important in Oklahoma. It's very important within the framework of the Oklahoman. And it looks to me like it's in really good hands.
When I was a kid, I was a paper boy. I was very cognizant of the fact that there was one deadline, one newspaper a day. And today with the internet, man, it is just constant. So the responsibilities of a sports editor in a newspaper have changed to much more of a kind of a broadcast style, in that it's ongoing all day long. Every minute is another deadline. And I think Ryan does a really good job of taking on a large task and figuring out a way for it to work. You can get more information on Ryan and his colleagues at the Oklahoman at their website, oklahoman.com. And we have a website, theverdict.tv. Love to see you log on there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a subject you'd like to see us cover. That's going to do it for now. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week right here on The Verdict.